A bit over a year ago, I left the comforts of my home in Canada and traveled across the globe to Singapore. Here are the top 5 things I've learned so far.
What's it like inside your mind, my dear?
Now, before I start, just a quick introduction. I'm a college student at the University of Toronto, and currently for this semester, I'm studying abroad at the National University of Singapore. I make videos centered on student life and tech intern life, and for the current chapter of my channel, Life on Exchange. I've already made 2 vlogs documenting the first week of my time here, on moving, on classes, and exploring the beautiful city of Singapore. So if that interests you, I definitely recommend that you check them out. Let's talk about life. Probably what I was most worried about prior to traveling abroad was the social scene. Would I make friends? Would I be around other people? Those were the questions that were circulating through my mind. TLDR, so far meeting people on exchange has been very comfortable. Now, there is a lot to unpack about this in regards to both exchangers and local students, so let's go a bit more in depth. At NUS, the exchange program is insanely large, housing a few thousand students every semester, and because of that, it has not been difficult to locate other exchange students at all. If I had to summarize my past week here, it'd probably be described best as if you're back in first year, in a sea of unknown faces where everyone's so excited to meet new people and have new experiences. In addition to classes and just dining hall meals, the school also organized a lot of exchanger social events, so there are many opportunities for you to just sit beside someone new and make a new friend. Of course, similar to university back home, it's really up to you to reach out to people after and to keep hanging out further to become good exchange buddies. From what I've heard and honestly what I've experienced, it's a lot easier and a lot more likely that you'll develop your closest circle of friends with other exchange students on the trip. This is definitely a little bit different from meeting the local students. In respect to that, I'd say it's equally as possible, but will just take a bit more effort on your part. I stay in a student hall residence that houses mainly Singaporean students, and the experience has been amazing so far. Most of the students here have been very welcoming, and I've been introduced to a lot of the people living in my dorm already. But there's undisputably a more distant vibe compared to when meeting the exchangers on the trip. I'm not sure exactly how to describe this, but I think it comes from a lot of the local students already having their pre-existing friend groups and honestly having a more academically demanding schedule than the other exchange students. In a way, it feels like you're trying to force yourself into an already established system, and that definitely just makes things a little bit harder. Once again, it's definitely possible to connect with the local students. I mean, I feel like I've already met a handful of people who I really vibe with, but I just know that I'll take more proactivity to get from here to here. Now, social life is exciting and important, but there is something that's a lot more worth noting. Let's talk about the food. Ever since I knew that I was coming to Singapore, all I've been hearing about is how delicious and how amazing the food would be. And honestly, that's exactly what it's been. So what makes it great? The accessibility and the price. At NUS, there's quite literally food accessible at every inch and every corner of campus. Every faculty building has its own canteen filled with dozens of stalls, each selling a different type of food. So if you're craving a specific type of food, chances are you can find it within a 5-minute walk of you. Now, I've only been to a handful of these canteens, but here are a few of them right over here. Now, in addition to these campus canteens, my student residence and a handful of others have a built-in dining hall plan. Granted, the quality of the dining hall food is about what you would expect, but it is very accessible. The student residences that don't have a meal plan will usually be compensated by having 1 or 2 more canteens that are really close to their residences. Now, outside of campus, that's where food really elevates to an entirely another level. Singapore is lined up with hawker centers that sells quality food at every single vendor. Just look at some of these. I've also been able to try some of the more popular Asian chains that exist in North America, like Hai Di Lao, Din Tai Fung. They're equally as great here and honestly much cheaper. As for the prices of foods in canteens, hawker centers, food courts, it's also much cheaper than in the US or in Canada, whereas back home I'd spend roughly $15 to $20 a meal. Every meal here is averaging to around $5, which is just absolutely ridiculous. And now while a lot of it is sunshine and rainbows, there are a few things that I've learned to be a bit more cautious about in regards to food on exchange. I was checking my spendings yesterday and I realized that cheap food still adds up. Given how cheap drinks, meals, snacks are here in Singapore, I've realized that I've been treating myself more and more, eating more and more, and obviously just spending more. Because of that, my expenses have gone up just because the quantity of foods that I'm intaking has gone up. Be careful of that. I'm also realizing that my body needs time to adjust to all of the new foods. After eating every meal at hawker centers, food courts, and canteens, the food started to feel overly heavy and overly greasy for my body to handle. Around the third day, I had to find a hidden salad store just to detox my body from all of it. And honestly, I'll probably still be going back there every once in a while. Lastly, I've really been experiencing a culture shock in terms of not being able to eat my comfort foods. The best example that I can think of is the breakfast foods that I've been eating over the past few days. In the dining halls, they'll usually serve us heavy breakfasts like fried rice or fried noodles, and as someone who typically eats a really light breakfast like a banana or a smoothie bowl, sometimes I'll just straight up give up on trying to eat the heavy breakfasts altogether. And yeah, that's about it for food. As an exchange student, I'm also here for the education. So let's talk academics. The first thing I notice in my lectures is how much more passionate the teachers here are about the education. Each of the 4 classes that I'm taking have surprised me with how enthusiastic, how energetic, and how engaging the professors all are. They're joking around with the class, making pop culture references. One teacher was even pacing back and forth between the rows of students just to make it that much more engaging for us. It's a direct contrast to what I've experienced back home, where the average class has teachers robotically reading off slides and giving the impression that they're not really there because they want to be. Maybe local NUS students will disagree with me, but I think the quality of teachers is way up. Aside from that, the other aspects of classes seem pretty standard. Some classes are recorded, some aren't, some have exams, some have projects. So far, nothing else has stood out to me, but I'm sure that as more time goes on, I'll notice a few more differences. On that note, some of the differences that I've definitely noticed already are the price differences between some of the cheaper products here and also the more expensive products here as well. As expected, there's a lot that's cheaper here in Singapore, but to my surprise, a decent amount of categories that are more expensive as well. Like I mentioned earlier, all of the hawker centers, the canteens, food courts, all of those foods are a lot cheaper. A $20 meal turns into a $5 meal, an $8 drink turns into a $3 drink. I've also been finding out that there are a lot of cheaper alternatives to Western services that are available here. For example, Uber and Lyft, which dominate North America, are pretty much replaced by Grab and a few other companies here in Singapore. And a typical ride here in Singapore with Grab will be a few dollars cheaper than a ride of the same distance in America through Uber. In online shopping, Amazon is still an option here, but they have other e-commerce sites like Shopee and Lazada that have a lot cheaper alternatives if you don't really care about Western branding and whatnot. Now, on the flip side of this, some items are unbelievably expensive. If you guys know me personally or have really watched my videos in the past, you know that I love going to cafes and Starbucks just to get work done. So it pains me to say that Starbucks and other local cafes are much more expensive here. A typical drink will range from $8 to $10, and that's really just not something I'm trying to pay. And lastly, for some reason, toiletry liquids are a lot more expensive, such as shampoo, conditioner, sunscreen. Like a typical bottle of body wash will go for $20. So if you are ever planning to come to Singapore, come here for abroad, I'd recommend you bring as many of these toiletry liquids as you can, just to save on some of those costs. And yeah, that's about the end of my long spiel, and roughly all the things I've noticed so far in my past week in Singapore. For me, this video is a nice creative break from the Singapore vlogs, but trust me, there is much more to come. I'm hoping to make more content on Singaporean food, on Southeast Asian travels, and perhaps even get back to student interview content. There's a lot to look forward to, but for now, ciao.